Hello and welcome to StudyIQ. In this lecture, we will discuss about return on assets and return on equity. Return on assets and return on equity. What is return on asset and what is return on equity? Briefly, if we say, these two are two main indicators of the performance of banks. So, these are the indicators of performance of banks. Why return on asset and why return on equity has become an important current affair is because recently we see in the news that the performance of the public sector banks, the PSBs, has come down comparatively to the other commercial banks. So this is the reason why return on assets and return on equity has become important current affair topics. So in this lecture, let us see what is return on asset and also we will explain what is return on equity and how it measures the performance of banks and why it is important. So as we said, both these are indicators of the performance of banks. First of all, let us see what is return on assets. So return on assets or ROA. Return on asset indicate how profitable is a bank compared to its assets. So relative to its assets, how profitable is the bank. So profit is calculated on the basis of the assets of the bank. So this is the relationship between the assets and the profit of the banks. So return on asset, it is a measurement. We already said that it is an indicator. So this is a measurement and this measures the relationship between profit and the assets of a bank. So return on asset measures how efficiently a bank utilizes its assets. So the efficiency at which the bank utilizes its assets. So if a bank utilizes its assets in a better manner, the return on assets will be more. So if there is better utilization of the assets, ROA or the return on assets will be more. So if the return on assets is less, what does this mean? If ROA or return on assets of a bank is less, it means that the bank uses less effectively its assets. The assets of the banks are underutilized or utilized inefficiently. So how do we derive at ROA or return on assets? So return on asset equal to net income of a bank divided by total average assets. Net income divided by average total assets. So if ROA is more, it means the banks are better utilizing its assets. And if ROA is less, it means there is lesser efficiency with the banks with regard to the utilization of the assets of the banks. So which one would be more ideal? Ideally, the ROA or the return on assets should be high. So if ROA or the return on assets is high, we already said it means the bank is better utilizing its assets. There is better management with the banks. So ideally the return on assets should be on the higher side or it should be improved. So when return on assets of bank is high, it means that there is more profit with the banks. So you know that with more efficiency and with better management, the profit of any firm would go up. So in case of banks also, when the return on its assets is high, it means the profit of the bank is high. So higher profit means better capital for the banks. Let us see how higher profits will add on to the capital of the banks. For that, let us take a balance sheet. So let us take a balance sheet. Balance sheet has two sides. One is the liability side. The second one, the asset side. So balance sheet has both assets and liabilities. So when it comes to assets, what are the main assets of a bank or any firm? First of all, any firm will have fixed assets. Fixed assets in the form of furniture, land, building, etc. A bank will also have current assets. So current asset means cash in hand, etc. are considered to be current assets. And the main asset for a bank is debtors. So bank will have debtors. Also, there should be a closing stock for any firm. So there will be a closing stock also. Coming to the liability side, the main liability of any firm, particularly a bank, is capital. So capital is a main liability. A firm will also have current liability as in case of current assets. So there will be current liability as well. There will be provisions also. Provisions, for example, taxation, dividend, etc. So tax, dividend, etc. So coming to the capital, we were discussing about the capital. So you must remember that in the case of a balance sheet, there is a capital, and the capital is in the liability side. So whatever profit a firm earns, and we are talking here about the banks. So whatever profit a bank earns, this is added to the capital. So profit is added to capital. So we said that when return on asset increases, or when there is more return on asset for the banks, the profit of the bank increases. So when profit of the bank increases, what will happen? This profit is added to the capital of the bank. So here we will see that the profit is added to the capital of the bank. So with better return on assets, that is when return on asset increases, the capital of the bank increases. It will lead to an increase in the capital of the bank. And what is the result of increase in capital of a bank? When the bank's capital increases, the bank will have more money for lending. So banks will have more money for lending, which means the business of the bank will expand. The profit will increase. So the productivity of the bank will increase. So this is the ultimate result. So ideally what should be there? The return on assets should be more, which means the bank should be able to utilize its assets in a better way. And ROA, or the return on asset, is one indicator of a bank's performance, or it measures how a bank utilizes its assets. Hope this is clear for you. Now coming to ROE, that is return on equity. What is equity? Equity is shareholders fund. So equity means shareholders, whatever the shareholders has given, that is equity. So what is return on equity? Return on equity measures the bank's ability to utilize the shareholders funds. So return on equity is the measurement of utilization of banks of their shareholders funds. Return on assets is utilization of assets. Here it is shareholders funds. Like the return on asset, return on equity should also be more. Why? Because the bank should be able to properly utilize the funds of the shareholders, that is the equity. So with better utilization of the equity or the shareholders funds, the return on equity will be more. So ideally the return on equity should be more. And what is the result of that? When return on equity is more, this will also add on to the capital of the bank. Let us see how. Coming back to the balance sheet, we have already seen the capital in the liability side, and we said that profit is added to the capital. Likewise, one more thing is added to the capital, that is reserves and surplus. So reserves plus surplus. So this is also added to the capital in the liability side of a balance sheet. When return on equity is more, the reserves and surplus of the bank will also be more. So when return on equity is more, reserves and surplus will increase, and this will increase the capital of the bank. So same like the previous case, that is return on asset. When the capital of the bank increases, the banks can lend more money to the public. The business of the banks will improve. Also, the banks will be more productive, more profitable, and also more efficient. We already said that when return on equity is more, it means the bank is more efficient in utilizing the shareholders fund. So this will leave a message to the public. The message is that the bank is efficient or not efficient in utilizing shareholders fund, and the shareholders are general public. So what will happen? If return on equity is less, people will not be willing to invest or will not be willing to take shares of the bank. So in the capital market, the banks will face a difficulty to raise additional funds. So when return on equity is less, it will be difficult for the banks to raise additional capital from the capital market. So with lesser capital, it is difficult for the banks to raise its business or expand its business activities. So coming back to the current affair, we already said that why return on asset and why return on equity has become an important current affair. The return on asset and the return on equity of the public sector banks has been low, or we can say this has been negative. So as we all know, public sector banks means those banks wherein which a majority of the share will be of the government. This is government owned banks, public sector banks. So what does this indicate? It means that public sector banks are less efficient and less profitable compared to its other counterparts, the other scheduled commercial banks. So comparing to its other counterparts, the profitability and the efficiency in the public sector banks are low, and this is the indication from the return on assets and return on equity of the public sector banks, and this has become an important concern for the government, and also this has increased the losses of the public sector banks. So this has become an important current affair. Compared to other commercial banks, the public sector banks are performing poorly on the basis of its return on assets and also return on equity, and this is the reason this has become an important current affair.